Well, good evening to each of you. It is the top of the hour. I'm Hardy Johnson, president of the Descendants of the Illegitimate Sons and Daughters of the Kings of Britain. We welcome you to this, our third in a series of educational presentations on how to successfully become a member of the Royal Bastards. Tonight, our two assistant heralds genealogists will be presenting helpful guidance on the topic, finding your bastard and your line. I'm unsure who will be presenting first, but we have Darcie Hind Posz, certified genealogist and fellow of the American Society of Genealogists, and Christopher C. Child. That being given, take it away, Darcie and Chris.
So my name is Darcie Hind Posz. I'm one of the assistant herald genealogists for the Royal Bastards. I joined the Royal Bastards in 2013 under a new bastard, Elizabeth Plantagenet, the illegitimate daughter of King Edward IV. Today I will discuss the 5 steps that I took to reconstruct and document that lineage. Step 1, audit. Step 2, review instructions and contact the RBs. Step 3, draft a pedigree. Step 4, kin links and reliable evidence. And then step 5, published sources. For step 1, audit. Begin with 2 separate audits. First, audit the RB lineages that are proven, including lines, kings, and children. There is a publication created by the Royal Bastards in our early years titled Royal Bastards from the Time of the Norman Conquest. It is available at the DAR library, and it includes a list of the known kings that produced bastards. Second, audit the RB list of known bastards and compare it to your own pedigree. See which lines may be applicable, perhaps organized by location. Cross-check possible lines against the list produced by the RBs. Further extend your comparison to 2 publications. First, Gibbon, Wilson, and Curtis, the RB book from 1066 to 1485, which includes Normandy, Plantagenet, Lancaster, and York bastards. And then next, Beauclerk, DeWar, and Powell's Royal Bastard book, which covers from 1485 to 1901, which includes Tudor, Stuart, and Hanoverian bastards. These should help you identify possible connections between your lineage and the location or time period of these bastards. Once you have determined a possible line for consideration, begin to consult the Royal Bastards instructions. Step 2, review instructions. It is important to do this early so that you know what type of evidence is acceptable, specifically in published resources. If a published resource is known to have errors, you will want to avoid relying heavily on that work to reconstruct a lineage. Review the directions and instructions. Standards and requirements have changed over the years, and some submissions that were acceptable in the past may no longer be applicable. Acceptable evidence. Carefully review the list of acceptable evidence, especially for published resources. Keep track of how many of them you will rely on when you begin to construct your lineage. Consider the reliability and the sheer number that you will be leaning on, because this may impact your lineage also. And then see pages 2 through 3 of the application instructions for details. Still on step 2, contact the Royal Bastards about possible lines to query. Contact the Herald genealogist to see if there are any recent submissions from 2013 forward that share a common ancestor with yours. Check with the Herald genealogist to see if there are known errors for a specific illegitimate child. Contact them to make sure that you have the most recent copy of the directions and guidelines and blank application to fill out. Keep in mind that for a new line, the evidentiary burden falls on the applicant. The Herald genealogists cannot prejudge a submission or consider proof piecemeal. They will need to see all of the evidence as it is finally submitted. For step 3, drafting your pedigree. Regardless of your preferred format, evaluate your pedigree to see if there are close connections to a bastard. Do it step by step for each generation. Make sure dates and locations work. Draft out your pedigree to see if it could connect to a bastard line. Make sure the math works for known dates and that known locations are possible. Verify the viability of names, dates, and places. Examples of a pedigree not working: a child born 10 years after the death of a parent in Maryland, not in the UK at the time of conception, etc. Many early lineages will have estimated birth years based on marriages or on the birth year of a first known child. Familiarize yourself with visitations and other publications that include pedigrees as told to the author. See how much can be correlated with contemporaneous documentary evidence. For step 3, kin links with reliable evidence. The most recent generations can be established using vital records. Later generations may require a combination of available court or parish records, along with an analysis resolving or clarifying a kin link. Wills, church records, estates, inquest postmortems, and other sources are available at the National Archives UK and at the local county level. And for step 5, published sources in lieu. Evaluate acceptable published resources and see if they are relevant to your own lineage. Look for diverse documentation, or if you find a reliable set like Arnold's Rhode Island works or Surtees for Durham, make use of them when original records are in poor condition. Published sources may also waypoint to original records when an analysis or proof argument or summary is necessary to make a linkage claim. So I'm just going to dive right in. When I submitted my application to the Royal Bastards in 2013, it was for a not yet established child, Elizabeth Plantagenet, bastard daughter of King Edward IV. I've been tracing the Plantagenet to Hind connection for years through the Visitations and Surtees publications. I had a draft of the lineage, but I wanted to supplement it with supporting documentation, such as wills, church records, parish records, and other available records. For step 1 for the audit, when I did an audit of the known bastards, Elizabeth was listed as a probable daughter in the list of known bastards of Edward IV. It also stated that she married Sir Thomas Lumley. The Given, Wilson, and Curtis Royal Bastard book discussed that Edward IV had 3 known illegitimate children, and that Elizabeth was one of them. It noted that there had been misreportings of which Sir Thomas Lumley had married Elizabeth, and that contemporaneous evidence was lacking. The identity issue with Lumley was good to have on my radar when drafting the pedigree, and I knew that I would want to resolve that outstanding issue in order for the lineage to be applicable for the Royal Bastards. For step 2, I was concerned about a few published genealogies and compilations that I had planned on using. Richardson's Plantagenet Ancestry was one, and the Surtees publications were another. Both had pedigrees and discussions, and I wanted to verify or supplement their claims by utilizing other forms of documentation. Page 2 of the application instructions provided guidance and acceptable citation formats. For the pedigree draft, which is the funnest part, my Hind line immigrated to Hawaii from South Shields, Durham County, England in the early 1800s. I evaluated visitations and other publications like Surtees, which had many volumes related to Durham County in England for pedigrees. I went up and down several of my Durham County lines to see if there were any adjacent or if there were any mentions of being connected to royal lineages. One line was Blakeston, which connected to Lambton, which connected to a Lumley that supposedly married an illegitimate daughter of Edward IV. I went back and forth to various publications to cross-check the assertions. Were the links possible? Was there other evidence I would need to consult? I generated a research list for later. If the pedigree that I drew out was correct, I was 20 generations removed from Edward IV when I plotted it out. Also, during the drafting, I noted errors in the lineage to resolve. Any errors in the lineage that needed to be resolved in order to have a verifiable pedigree. To accustom myself to resolving these lineage errors, I went step by step up the pedigree. For instance, my Robert Hind was the illegitimate son of the territorial senator of the same name, so a proof argument and supporting documentation had to be done for that kin link. Several generations of Hind men named William, Henry, and Oswald were merged into one. My line had a Blakeston female marry into the Hind family. That was one of the root people to connect to the proposed Edward IV bastard line, so it was necessary to show that my line was the correct Oswald Hind line, and not that of his cousin of the same name attributed to him, which even the Hind family of Hawaii and the family historians for there thought that the disinherited Oswald was our line, which would have disconnected us from the Plantagenet line. Some generations would need more firm dates and locations with reliable documentary evidence. This was provided through church records, parish records, court records, and other local records. Still on for the drafting of step 3, it was essential to have documentation that connected to the root people who were required for the pedigree to reach the illegitimate daughter, Elizabeth. Each generation of my pedigree draft that I wanted additional documentation for was noted in order to fulfill the standards of documentation set forth by the royal bastards. Step 4 for kin links and reliable evidence. Names, dates, locations, and connections were then verified with evidence and cited on the applications. Generations 14 through 20 were verified with vital records. Generations 9 through 14 were verified with church records, parish records, and court records that included will, probate, estate inventories, land records, and tax assessments. Generations 4 through 9 were verified with church records or headstones when available in burial assessments, local records, wills and estates, and transcribed court records if the records were no longer available or in poor condition. Citations for claims and descriptions of claims were done in the preferred format of the application instructions. And just as an example for step 5, one of the published resources. Generations 1 through 4 did rely on published resources. Overlaying claims from the published sources with other independently created sources was necessary. From Elizabeth Plantagenet and 4 generations down, I relied on the Richardson Plantagenet volumes, but I then evaluated each claim and each citation. When you evaluate published sources, checking out the claims of the author enables you to build trust with them. You evaluate cited claims by tracking the original source to see if it matches what the author suggested. Richardson's work is interesting because there are so many sources cited. Evaluating each one to see how he arrived at a claim allows you to backtrack through his methodology. Evaluating the cited sources brings you closer to the original. For example, his claim of Elizabeth being the illegitimate daughter of Edward IV can be backtracked to a papal dispensation for several generations in which her son was fourth-degree kindred to his new wife. Richard Lumley shared great-grandparents with his wife. Richard's great-great-grandparents were the same as his wife's great-grandparents. When the Surtees volume in the footnote is evaluated, it corresponds with what Richardson claims. Published sources should be used on a case-by-case basis, and it is important to verify an author's claim when constructing a lineage. For that first generation, I used several published sources, such as compilations like Richardson's Plantagenet Ancestry, and the various Surtees volumes for Durham County to build upon as I reconstructed that lineage. So I know it was only a few slides, but I hope that I highlighted the steps I took to submit my application to the Royal Bastards. I undertook an audit of the proven and known Royal Bastards to see if there were any close to my known lineage. I studied the instructions thoroughly and contacted the Royal Bastards for any questions about citations, preferred format, and other details that did not require the Herald genealogist to prejudge my work. I drafted a pedigree that I suspected would link to a bastard of a king of England, but also noted any lineage issues that may have needed to be resolved in order to have a verifiable lineage. And I collected documentation to connect the 20 generations from myself back to Edward IV. And when I did use published sources, I checked out the citations to see the reliability of the evidence and the claims presented. On a case-by-case basis, I used some and built upon the work of others to locate more reliable evidence and apply it to the lineage. The process is challenging and it can take years, but it's also a fun excuse to encounter new record groups. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Child, also an assistant herald genealogist for the Royal Bastards and secretary treasurer. I joined the Royal Bastards in 2020 under William Longsby, an illegitimate son of King Henry II. I had been interested in joining this organization for many years, but really only took it head on in the early months of COVID when I had no more excuses for putting it off. While I've dabbled in medieval royal genealogy for many years, I do not consider it one of my genealogical specialties, as I've largely focused on problem analysis in the northeastern United States during the colonial and federal periods. However, I always enjoy a challenge and consider my application to the Royal Bastards to be a rewarding exercise and learning more about the group's history and evolution. So following on Darcie's talk, I'll go through the most common bastards that people have joined under, frequent strategies that candidates may consider for applying when they learn they have a so-called gateway ancestor of royal descent, how you may find a bastard line if that is not already clear, and evaluating the evidence when looking for these other descents and some of the known problems that may allow us to focus our efforts in certain directions. So since our founding in 1950, we have had 395 approved applications, give or take, with some supplemental lines and some numbering issues during our various record keeping. Before summarizing the most common bastards, I should also point out that the concept of what qualifies to us as a royal bastard has evolved modestly over the years and is summarized on our website in Nathaniel Taylor's essay, Which Bastards, essentially relating to the adoptions of legitimacy and illegitimacy as a 12th century phenomenon in Great Britain, making the earliest English monarch with qualified bastards as King Henry I and the earliest Scottish monarch as King William the Lion. There has been lineage papers under previous understandings of what worked as a bastard that are not presently accepted, such as Githa of Wessex, a daughter of King Harold II from his marriage that was contracted in the Danish fashion, which is explained in more detail in Nat's essay. So these numbers will not add up to 395, as I am only listing bastards that we would accept today. So it shouldn't be any surprise that the most frequently used bastards derive from the earliest kings. These being 131 members have joined under King Henry I's son, Robert of Caen, Earl of Gloucester, and 111 under Henry II's son, William Longsby, Earl of Salisbury. Members have joined in the 20s and teens under King John's bastards, Joan, Lady of Wales, and Richard of Dover. William the Lion's daughter, Isabel of Scotland, and other bastards of King Henry I, Reginald, Earl of Cornwall, Henry Fitzhenry, and with just 4 approved applications, Henry's daughter, Constance Fitzroy. For even smaller amounts of just 3, 2, and 1, people have joined under King Henry I's bastards, Alice, Maud, and William de Tracy. A few for Joan and Richard of Cornwall. These are the illegitimate children of King John's son, Richard, Earl of Cornwall. 2 have joined as descendants of Antigone of Gloucester, the illegitimate daughter of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, son of King Henry IV. And we've had a member each under Charles Lennox and Charles Beauclerc, both bastard sons of King Charles II. And these are the only lines where there is no gateway ancestor, as the lineage of those members is entirely within England. Darcy's ancestor, Elizabeth Plantagenet, daughter of King Edward IV of England, and Sir John Stuart, bastard of King Robert III of Scotland, are the only instances where we've had a king's bastard that has so far resulted in just one other member. I'd say also that Charles II's sons are the most recently born bastards, for us being born in the 17th century. Charles's younger brother, James II, also fathered several qualified bastards, and there are a few qualified bastard grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Stuart and Hanoverian kings, with the last monarch known to have qualified bastards as King William IV. But so far, none of these descendants have joined the RBs. Now, as Darcie had mentioned, you can contact us with an outline of your descent, upon which the herald genealogist will either greenlight the line or not, based on his own knowledge of the lines. Some of the reasons Nathaniel Taylor may not recommend a candidate pursue a certain line is because of what past RB's President Henry Hoff would say is when a lineage is underproven, where a line may be correct or at least a kinship, but the evidence is not sufficient for our standards to establish the affiliation between generations. Examples of this are lines going through Ida Longsby, wife of Walter Fitzrobert, where the sources are not entirely clear on whether she was a daughter or granddaughter of William Longsby, Earl of Salisbury. Also, when I first learned about the royal bastards, I was interested in joining through my 11 times Welsh-born ancestors, Griffith Bowen and Margaret Fleming, who lived in Boston and Roxbury, Massachusetts in the 1630s and 40s before they returned to England, but left most of their adult children behind. The Welsh pedigrees for both of them do outline numerous descents to Robert of Caen, bastard of Henry I. However, these pedigrees were compiled by heraldic bards, largely written in the 15th century or later, and concerned many generations remembered orally. This isn't to say that all the lines are wrong, but more work is needed beyond those pedigrees, and this may be more work than you would want to necessarily do. Also, some past applications may have been based on an assumption of someone as a bastard of a king that has since been discounted. Some of these arguments had to do with a given person being related to the king, and someone arguing that the given illegitimate placement as the only way that this could be, which wouldn't necessarily be acceptable to our standards today, or more recent research identifying a previously assumed bastard to having other parents entirely. One of the examples of this latter category is John, the First Lord Beautort, who had been previously considered a bastard son of King Edward I, but a 1988 article in the American Genealogist by F.N. Craig showed an alternative hypothesis of John instead as the son of Guy Beautort. So many of us hear about the royal bastards after learning we descend from a king through the compendia by Gary Boyd Roberts, which started as the royal descents of 500 immigrants, later 600, and now 900. and the three works of Douglas Richardson, Plantagenet Ancestry, Magna Carta Ancestry, and Royal Ancestry. I'll go over these compendia a bit more shortly, but one thing to remember about Roberts is that he will only mention a bastard descent if it's the best line. He's not outlining all royal lines. Okay. So frequently someone may say that they learned from Roberts that they have a line back to, say, Edward III, Edward I, or Henry III. None of them who have had bastards of their own. I had mentioned earlier Githa of Wessex, who is an ancestor of King Edward III herself. A past application for a gateway descendant of Edward III did go through Githa of Wessex, which we would now no longer accept. However, it did make me curious about bastards in the ancestry of British kings. Before showing the next two charts, I'd say that all English monarchs through King Edward III do not have known descents from qualified British bastards. All English monarchs since King Richard II and all Scottish monarchs since Robert the Bruce, later King Robert I, do have descents from qualified British bastards. However, for the descendants of King Edward III, it's not as simple as his wife Philippa of Hainault having a bastard in her ancestry, as she likewise had no known qualified British bastards in her ancestry. So I made this chart to show how eventually all living descendants of King Edward III will have British bastards in their ancestry. For the eldest son, Edward the Black Prince, his wife Joan, Countess of Kent, descends from a bastard of King John, making King Richard II the first English king descending from a qualified bastard. Although Richard II had no children, there are numerous descendants of Joan, Countess of Kent, through children of her earlier marriage. For descendants of Edward III's sons, Lionel of Antwerp and Thomas of Woodstock, they both married women that descended from bastards of King Henry I. Edward's daughter, Isabella's only surviving child with issue, Marie de Coucy's husband, also descended from a bastard of Henry I. For Edmund of Langley, his son, Richard of Consberg, married a great-granddaughter of Lionel of Antwerp, so she descended from a bastard of Henry I, as well as bastards of King John through her other ancestry. For Edmund's daughter, Constance, her husband, Thomas Le Despencer, descended from a bastard of Henry I, and Constance also had a bastard daughter herself, Eleanor, by Edmund Holland. Edmund himself, as a grandson of Joan, Countess of Kent, descends from a bastard of King John, but also Eleanor Holland herself is a qualified bastard, as she is the bastard of a grandchild of a king, and in her case, this is the only known situation where the qualified parent of a bastard is a woman. John of Gaunt's first wife, Blanche of Lancaster, descends from a bastard of King Henry I, so all descendants from this marriage work that way. However, descendants of John's next two marriages are interesting. For his 4 Beaufort children by Catherine de Ruyt, while they were born illegitimately during John's second marriage, since they were later legitimized, RB's applications are not allowed through the Beauforts specifically in that way. However, for the 3 with children, John Beaufort's wife, Margaret Holland, was also a grandchild of Joan, Countess of Kent, and so a descendant of a bastard of King John. Joan Beaufort married twice. Her first husband, Robert Ferrars, descends from a bastard of King Henry I, while Joan's second husband, Ralph Neville, descends from bastards of 4 kings, Henry I, Henry II, William the Lion, and John. Henry Beaufort, Cardinal and Bishop of Winchester, had 1 illegitimate child, Jane Beaufort. While Jane's maternity is uncertain, she, like her cousin Eleanor Holland, qualifies as an illegitimate child of a grandchild of a king. This is irrespective of Jane's father, Cardinal Beaufort's own illegitimate birth and later legitimization. For the descendants of John of Gaunt by his second marriage, this gets a bit trickier as his only surviving child from that marriage becomes the Queen of Castile. However, subsequent bastard marriages are via cousin marriages from other descendants of John of Gaunt via his first marriage that resulted in John's daughter that became the Queen of Portugal. So through these Castilian Portuguese intermarriages, all descendants of John of Gaunt have qualified British bastard ancestry after 5 generations, and thus all descendants of King Edward III. For descendants of Edward I, I have not been quite as successful with completing his descendants because of departures from England for certain branches. However, most Gateway American immigrants with Edward I as their most recent king go through either his daughters Joan and Elizabeth or his younger sons Thomas and Edmund. For Joan of England, her first husband, Gilbert de Clare, descends from a bastard of Henry I, while the children of her second marriage likewise marry spouses with bastards in their ancestry. Although I think all or most American Gateway descendants of Joan go through her first marriage. For Edward I's son, Edmund of Woodstock, his wife Margaret descends from a bastard of King John, and their daughter is Joan, Countess of Kent, mentioned frequently in my previous chart. For Edward's son, Thomas of Brotherton, his daughters each marry men with qualified bastards in their ancestry, back to Henry I for both, as well as John for Margaret's husband. For Elizabeth of England, while most of the Gateway descendants will qualify, there is a branch of descendants I could not find bastard ancestry. Her children, Margaret and William, each marry a spouse with a bastard descent to Henry I. Her daughter Eleanor's daughter Purnell's husband also descends from a bastard of Henry I. Then for Eleanor's son, James Boteler, he has 3 children with issue, and of these, Eleanor and James both have spouses going back to either John, Henry I, or William the Lion. And this younger, James Boteler also has illegitimate children with his own niece, the daughter of his sister Eleanor. For the elder James Boteler's daughter, Joan, I cannot get her spouse back to a British bastard, and the family at this point is firmly in Ireland. While there are some intermarriages between Joan and the younger James's descendants, there are some Irish descendants that I could not find qualified British bastards in their ancestry. For Edward I's daughter, Eleanor, one grandchild married a bastard of Henry I, while the other married an Italian, with their descendants going to Italy. Again, likely marrying into families without British bastards in their ancestry. For Edward's daughter, Margaret, her son John's wife descends from a bastard of Henry I. For King Edward II's descendants, other than Edward III, this is somewhat interesting. His daughter, Eleanor of Woodstock, moved to the Netherlands, and her only surviving child, Reginald, Count of Gelders, had only had illegitimate issue, making them qualified as bastards of a grandchild of a king, making all descendants of Edward II qualified as well. So most descendants of Edward I will qualify, other than these stray Italian and Irish branches. Now, the whole process of finding the line for these spouses essentially involves going down to go up. Gary Roberts provides a skeletal outline of the most recent king. For Douglas Richardson's works, Plantagenet ancestry shows the multiple descents from Geoffrey, Count of Anjou, the father of King Henry II, but also through Geoffrey's own bastards. Magna Carta ancestry shows descents from Magna Carta barons, and then royal ancestry to descents from William the Conqueror and his sister Adelaide of Normandy. One thing I would point out here is the value of earlier editions of both works. Before the publication of Plantagenet Ancestry, Gary Roberts would cite journals and earlier compendia, such as Ancestral Roots by Frederick Lewis Weiss. For immigrants developed after the publication of Royal Descents of 500 Immigrants that were first listed by Richardson, Roberts will usually cite Richardson without other material. So for my own bastard line, I descend from the Gateway Mary Guy Maverick of Dorchester, Massachusetts. In Roberts's first edition, he outlines the descent back to King Henry III in an entirely legitimate line. The lower image are the sources he gives in the Royal Descents of 900 Immigrants. Roberts points out that further proof of generation 7 to 9 would be desirable, and he has 2 instances of said to be in this lineage. However, he also notes that lesser royal descents through Dowish, Farrington, Stukely, and Fitzroger families are summarized in Ancestral Roots by Weiss. For all of these reasons, I chose to look for bastards in the ancestry of Mary Guy Maverick's mother, Grace Dowrish. So within those generations of Douglas Richardson's Plantagenet ancestry, there was a lineage to William Longsby. Within Doug's unmasked listing of sources were references that I could generally consider as reliable and gathered them myself. These included citations to Inquisition's post-mortem, chancery proceedings, and reference journal articles. I pulled all of those sources myself and began my application. Within an RB's application, it's fine to piggyback off of past research. It's just important to explain how you understand how one's research and sources lead to the conclusions of life data and generational linkage. While I wouldn't consider this Mary Guy Maverick's maternal lineage to have any obvious roadblocks, I still had some surprises with noticing the Stukely pedigree in Devon differing on certain children, with some giving my ancestor Thomas Stukely a daughter, Marjorie, who was mine and married Charles Farrington, while others giving a son, Maurice, with later visitations giving both. Ultimately, I realized this was only one child, with some compilers of visitations reading the Herald's notation of Marjorie as Maurice. So I wrote a short proof argument explaining this 16th century gender swap. So if you have a known gateway and want to find a qualified bastard and it's not already outlined, the general process is following the spouses along the line. You can search other lineages online with a degree of caution, such as genealogics by the late Leo Vandepar, Roglo by Gene Webb, Wikitree, or even Family Search to outline a descent from a specific bastard. Then see how many generations are treated in Roberts and or Richardson, and follow the sources and other sources that you are led to. Once you feel reasonable that there are no obvious hiccups or roadblocks, submit the lineage to us to get an application and go from there. As I said earlier, I considered this application process, while different than other hereditary organizations, to be a rewarding experience and gave me a terrific appreciation for medieval genealogy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Darcie. I'm going to hop on as your colleague among the stable of the Herald genealogists for the Royal Bastards. It was really instructive and also restful for me to be listening to each of your personal takes on how you did the process yourself and how you distilled some important informational tips out of your own experience of having gone through that process to share with others. Well, I'm happy to start with a question myself, just to prime the pump a little bit. And it has to do first to Chris and to one of the more recent slides in your presentation. Although I absolutely loved your systematic review of finding legitimate descendants of kings who then married descendants of bastards, and the fact that they all end up, except for how did you call it? Stray lines?
Stray Irish and Italian lines of Edward the First. Yeah.
But we have had some surprisingly interesting and diverse lines that go from Britain to other places and then into North America. And one of the great things, although I said, I was going to ask Chris a question first, one of the great things I wanted to point out to Darcie, or just point out to others about Darcie's line, is that her American immigrant ancestor who brought a line from Britain to, eventually to America, came through Hawaii, not through the East Coast. And that was marvelous. And Darcie, I just wanted to ask you to remind me or remind us. So now I am taking away, Chris, my question from you and going to Darcie first. The immigrant from England to Hawaii, did he arrive in Hawaii before Hawaii was officially part of the United States?
Yes, when it was still a territorial, technically a kingdom, the Kingdom of Hawaii at that point.
Yeah.
He arrived in, I want to say, in the 1840s.
Yeah. So therefore, he wasn't an immigrant from England to the United States. He went from England to another sovereign nation, and then, became he or a child or a grandchild then became a United States resident after the annexation then. And I think that does, in that respect, does mirror the experience of some other lines, although not to my knowledge lines that have been used for the royal bastards, but have been used for other hereditary societies with royal descents, where somebody has emigrated from Europe to North America, but in a part of North America that is part of a separate sovereign country, and then becomes territory of the United States while their descendants are living there. And I'm thinking of the American Southwest for that. I did want to go back to Chris, though, because the question on my mind, which is a process question that is encountered by a lot of people who are going through with lines that they've already identified through Gateway Ancestors in the Compendia by Roberts and Richardson. And particularly, Chris, you posted a couple of photos of just showing the arrangement of citations in a page of Roberts's Royal Descents, where what was cited actually changed from one edition to the next. And then on a different slide, you had the even larger fine print mass of cited sources for a generation in one of Richardson's compendia. And my question about process for you, based on your experience, when you said that you went through hunting down, kind of sorting out, resolving and hunting down the citations for a generation in one of Richardson's compilations, Douglas Richardson's compilations, did you hunt and gather everything based purely on the citation? Or did you try to determine beforehand whether that source would be probative in a way that didn't duplicate something that you had already found? I know a lot of people are simply look at it as it's a lot of work in separating out what is in some cases 20 or 30 different citations in Richardson's works, which for some lines have that many. So how did you approach that particular point?
Sure. So I generally looked what I would say to find the sources that I considered to be the most valuable first, and how much of the additional sources I pursued kind of depended on the earliest sources that I found. So if they generally seemed to verify all that I was trying to find, I still tried to get to some of his later sources. Sometimes I couldn't exactly figure out why a source was particularly given for a family, but I largely went for, visitations, wills, anything that kind of, or chancery things that mentioned how so-and-so was a child of so-and-so, the ones that I would think would have the best value in terms of linkages. I also, when in the summary that I did, I never put a slide of Richardson's summary of a person, but I paid also attention to see if he was giving exact dates or ages at a certain time that pointed to a specific document. So not always necessarily for the linkage, but if it says, was 14 at this date, that meant that would give me some indication that there's a document that says that, whether the person's called to court or something along those lines. So I also kind of looked at the sources in comparison with what was said in the summary, especially with regards to specific dates or ages as they were stated there.
Thank you, Chris. Can I just jump in on that and say, and it's reinforcing the same point, that for a lot of people, what is seen as a chore is to work from a blurb which may give very specific details, but doesn't connect a detail specifically with a footnote to a source. And you have to and experience helps after you've tracked down some of these sources to predict what kind of source a date is likely drawn from, if it's a burial date, if it's a death date, if it's a marriage settlement, this kind of thing. And then the whole other category not fully mentioned there was what Darcie called the kin links, that parent to child link, where some categories of sources are much more predictably, predictable to furnish that. So that is the Inquisition's postmortem, in some cases the wills, and the visitations if you're dealing with generations that are relatively close to the time when the visitation pedigree was constructed. But in some cases, you have to go through a whole long list because it's not necessarily obvious what a source is. But it helps to look at other secondary sources where you might have better luck having a particular genealogical data point attached to a particular source. And the best example for that, which didn't really get mentioned tonight in either case, is the complete peerage, where most but not all of the articles try to adhere to a rule where every single statement in each sketch, each generation, is footnoted to an actual primary source document. But those footnotes, those citations are quite heavily abbreviated.
Yeah, there were periodic points in mine which referred to the complete peerage, and then periods where the ancestors were not, 2 or 3 where they were in, and then 2 or 3 out, and then back in because of whoever married so and so.
I just want to point out to all who are on the call still right now, but who might not be following the scrolling of questions in the chat. Darcie, thank you so much. And I'm sorry that you weren't prompted to do this by Hardy or me before. You've posted a handout as a document, and I think it's showing up when I click on the handout which you posted in the chat. It's a graphic image, so the hot links aren't hot linked. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
I could do a PDF if you want to email it to everybody later, and the links do work.
Yeah.
Zoom won't let me update or upload it as a PDF.
Oh, yes, and there are probably security hazards there. One of the things we can absolutely do is, we could spam every single member's and interested parties, every contact's email with the link, with the PDF document. We could also post it within a few days when the recording of this session will be made available. And perhaps we could do both. But this is an excellent document, and it has absolutely useful hot links. Darcie, there was a question that came through in the chat from Nikki LaRue that you answered. I don't know if you want to just summarize it orally as well.
Sure. Because she was asking about Scottish lines, and I know that with the Scottish lines, and Chris will probably be able to say if there's more to this too. I was thinking of Stuart line, but then also the fact that if your lineage is in northern England, like Durham, Northumberland, and it's in the debatable land area, there's a very good chance that you could check the lineages for, the Scottish bastard lines or whatever. There's a lot of it going back and forth during that time period. So I suggested checking out those 2 counties, but then also the Beauclerk, Dorr, and Powell's Royal Bastard book covers Scottish kings from 1066 forward.
Yeah.
So there are options out there if you're looking for a line.
Yeah. And one of the possible motivations for that question is that this is specifically one of the kind of predetermined limitations in Douglas Richardson's compendia, that he spends most of his attention on English lines, and only some Scottish lines are included, and those are only lines that go down to 17th century immigrants. One thing that's maybe not well known is the value of the best peerage reference set for Scotland, James Balfour Parle's Scottish Peerage, published from 1909 to 1918, roughly, or in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, in, I think, 7, 8, or 9 volumes. It's extremely comprehensive on including illegitimate children of everyone, both the Scottish royal family that are treated at the beginning of Volume 1, and then essentially illegitimate children of every Scottish peer that's listed, and they're complete families. Unlike the complete peerage, which covers all of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and the United Kingdom, the Scottish peerage, the effort was to list all children of everybody who can be presumed to hold a Scottish peerage title. And there are a lot of Scottish lines in Gary Roberts's compilations that aren't in Douglas Richardson's. And so that's another place to look for some ready-made illegitimate Scottish lines. And it is certainly fair to say, and Chris, I think you already made that point, that every legitimate descendant of a Scottish king after
Robert the
Bruce,
Robert the First, yeah.
has illegitimate descents from King Henry I. Yeah.
And plenty more illegitimate children of later Scottish kings.
Yeah. There's one question that came in the chat relatively recently, which I can answer. How do you get access to a copy of the latest version of the complete peerage? That's the one that covers all of England, Scotland, and Ireland. And that was published from 1900 something, or maybe 1911 through the 1940s or 1950s. And then there was an extra volume published at the end of the 20th century. And all of those volumes, it's either 13 or 14 volumes, are now freely available on Family Search. So you can download them as PDFs. And I've had those PDFs on my laptop forever, and I use them all the time. And that's absolutely something everyone should know about. We have on the website, actually, it's not yet on the website. There is a bibliography on the website that has, which is cited in Darcie's handout, the Royal Bastard Bibliography, which lists all the books that Darcie mentioned that list royal bastards. So Given Wilson, Beauclerc Duer, and some of these others. None of those books is available online. There is a separate bibliography that I've been working on, which is just called a Royal Descents Bibliography, which lists these compendia. It lists the peerages, the Scots peerage and the complete peerage, and other things. And some of these are available online, including even some of the modern compendia. There's, I think through Ancestry.com, there's one of the editions of Roberts's Royal Descents. And even on Google Books, you can find not the most recent edition, but one of the editions of Douglas Richardson's Plantagenet Ancestry and Magna Carta Ancestry. And you can see a lot of the pages, but maybe not all of them.
Yeah, it's Google snippet view kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. But
and sometimes just some pages, but skip.
Yeah, and the way Google Preview works, which is better than snippet view, but it limits the number of pages you can see. I think even some of Richardson's books are available as in a preview view. But those are, we should work together to assemble a clickable list of that sort of thing, because it certainly saves time and effort if you have some of these things virtually at your fingertips. And some more of them are now available online than most people might know. Yeah. I think that's everything that's come through the chat. But I don't want people to be discouraged from simply piping up orally. And Chris and Darcie, feel free to ask each other questions as well. I'm going to ask a question of both of you because you both mentioned this in different cases, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from both of you about how you went about doing this. And you can draw lots to see who goes first. And that's the idea of submitting a proof argument or a proof statement when a little extra is needed to make the kin link or to explain some other anomaly that you uncovered in your research going through the lineage. I think this is becoming a more generally understood concept for people applying to other hereditary societies and not just the royal bastards. Certainly more now than even a few years ago. But I think it's still making its way through the community. Uh, can you share any more insights on how you put together a proof argument? What did it look like? How long was it? What was the case that you might have, that you sought to iron out? Chris, you mentioned a gender swap, and I think it was a female name inserted by mistake for a male name or vice versa. I can't remember, Darcie, how you phrased, or how you, what was the context for mentioning it when you did?
For me, it was when if you have available evidence, if it conflicts, how to explain that you resolved it, what's the error and why it was a problem, pretty much making it so that it's neutralized. For me, this was right when the application was changing, so it was in 2013. So we didn't have I didn't have all of the line and spacing and the requirements for each item, you had to list a citation that you were using to prove it. And sometimes it's just not that clear. And so it's, a paragraph explaining this is how I resolved, the conflicting dates of birth, dates of death, different names, locations. It's usually just a small error. If it's something bigger, though, then I've usually published it in a quarterly and shown all of those steps and then cite that and then also include the relevant sources to it. The new application format does make it easier to show, not only cite what you're using, but also explain how you're applying it to what you're trying to connect it to. So.
Thanks. I agree with that assessment because I was one of the people behind that change. But, the idea is to encourage all of us to be able to articulate, not just in a case of resolving evidence that, isn't all identical, that points in different directions, because that's one of the major, that's a major, there's a genealogical standard that's devoted to that, resolving discrepant evidence. But even in every instance, to simply be in the habit of stating in words what it is that's, what the genealogical datum is based on. I guess I regard it as a sly form of conditioning, but it encourages us all to do more of the things that we enjoy to do as genealogists. Chris, was that your experience with, I think, a relatively uncontroversial explanation of what had been an error, essentially a scribal error in, was it a visitation pedigree?
Yeah, it was. So I went through the different variations of the visitation of Devon, and there were some in the 1500s and then some kind of combined ones later on. And I kind of noticed in Richardson that for my ancestor Thomas Stukely, he was giving him children Marjorie and Maurice. And then some of the ones, so there was ones that just said Marjorie and ones that just said Maurice. And then I realized it was just one person. And I was actually in this case able to get the notes from the College of Arms for those visitations. So it was written in the present tense that there was meant to be only one case. So it was a very, simple explanation that some later visitations of Devon had misread Marjorie as Maurice, and then kind of that's where it kind of all stemmed from. So it was like about a 2-page little summary explaining the issue. And I also wrote an American proof argument for one of my ancestors in Connecticut, where my several greats grandmother her parentage is established by her second husband being referred to as the brother-in-law of someone whose parents are known, while my ancestor didn't have parents specifically stated for any of her records. So,
yeah. Wow. Well, thank you both for walking us through those things. And thank you both for walking us more generally through your experience as candidates for this, and the fact that you I think what I heard from both of you is that you got a great deal of satisfaction out of that process, and it really was a genealogical skill building endeavor. And that's really what we hope to encourage everyone to do and to enjoy it while you're doing it. So we are available as a panel and individually to take questions however you may wish to send them by email to info@royalbastards.org, or I think you can also find our email addresses in other ways. I don't know if Hardy, if you're still with us and want to give us a valediction. I think Hardy may no longer be with us. He wasn't able to stick it out to the end of this session, but we have gone just past the top of the hour. But I want to thank you both for packing interesting perspectives into a nice tight time fit, and thank all of you who have attended this. And we look forward to continuing this with future offerings, TBD schedule and specific topics. But we hope to see more of you later. Thanks again, and a good evening to all.